Good evening and welcome back to Everyday Man of God. As most of you know, I am Stephen, whatever you want to call me. Some call me names that you probably shouldn't, but hey, that goes with the territory, doesn't it? Well, I am always thankful and grateful that you've taken your time to listen to this podcast. I know that folks can have a busy schedule, so to spend a half an hour or so with me could be fun or it could be frustrating. You never know how this works out. Tonight, I want to talk about the illusions of democracy and education and all of the modern Babylons we see around the world today. No matter where you go, no matter where you go, and you have to understand. And I'll talk about this in this one and many other videos or podcasts I've done. Everything's connected to the Roman Catholic Church, which is the Roman Empire. We all should know that by now. The UN controlled, NATO controlled. But we're gonna go a little off that slightly because that's what I do. Sometimes I go in a different direction, and you all are nice enough and kind enough to go with me on this little journey. So let's talk about democracy for a little bit. A lot of people like, oh, I know what democracy is. It's what a government runs on. And then other people will be telling you, you know what republic means? So not Republican, republic. So we can get into those conversations, but I'll say this. For many years, the society that we live in as a whole were convinced that they lived in what they believed in or believed was a democracy. And on the surface and in a rudimentary understanding of what we were told, a democracy doesn't sound that terrible. But like many things, they are not exactly what they appear to be. See, democracy, or the idea of democracy, has been around a while. Since even its origins, which is in Athens, Greece. And that was the Athenian democracy. Interesting side note, where I live, I'm not too far from a town called Athens, down in Tennessee. So I thought that was kind of interesting when I was putting together this podcast. Um, I'm like, oh, what are the odds? I live right next to Athens. I thought I would have to travel over the seas to get there, but I did not. But before that, before the Athenian democracy, there were different forms of democracy. Different kingdoms, different areas always were trying to figure out a democracy. There were two types of democracy: direct democracy and representative democracy. Or you can even say representative democracies. Here in America, we operate on mostly a representative democracy, where basically people elected others to represent the people. Sound familiar? Who elect them. But we know now, don't we? We know, or some have known for years, as you get older, you know what the younger generation doesn't seem to understand. And those that were older than me understood and understand things before I got to understand them. It's kind of how it works. But we know that does not happen. Well, at least not quite like it used to. Even though it was corrupt then, it's a lot more corrupt now. Then there is direct democracy, where in definition, the electorate makes decisions on policy initiatives without elected representative as a proxy. One can wonder why women are in the democracy. What are you talking about, Steve? Now you're just going off course. Well, hold on a second. because it's important to understand. People are always like, well, I want, what's then? I want democracy. I want democracy. I want democracy. A lot of people want democracy. But like I said before, one could wonder why women are in the democracy or choose to be. Because after all, if you look back in history, it was after all founded on the idea of only adult free males. So men, not women, men, not women. I'm going to get a lot of flack for that, but I'm just saying. This is what the Athenian democracy is based on. This is what our country goes to, the direct democracy and representative democracy. So when we're talking about these things, we should really look back in history. So when Democrats are railing about the importance of democracy, tell them that's wonderful. And then ask, so when will you be removing women from office? Or if it is a woman that you're speaking to, ask her, when will she be resigning? After all, the foundation of democracy was for men to rule in government and only men. I didn't I didn't make that rule up. I agree with it. I didn't make it up. People never understand what they support and what they back. Perhaps they will reimagine democracy. But then I guess it will no longer be a democracy, will it? If you change a definition, it's no longer the definition of which it was. And with everything going on in this country today, how many folks left believe in what was passed off as democracy all these years? The system that people have ruled themselves by for years. What was believed to be the best of all political philosophies. Yes, I did use that word on purpose. Is there actually any political institution that has lasted without realizing we cannot help ourselves or solve problems without God? Whether it be democracy, socialism, um, communism, Nazism, or any other dictatorship, they always seem to believe they have the answers to solve all the problems. And without God, guess what happens? Many have failed, and most will, and all will. Today, they have all, for the first time in history, embraced some form of democracy. Unity. There's that unity word again. All one. One world order. New world order, perhaps. Let's talk a little bit about the education. If you're a parent now who has kids in a public school or have had kids in the system in the last 20 years, you can definitely argue, but I'm just going to tell you my experience with the school system. A parent began at the beginning of conception. I just want to throw that in there. As a parent, I began 20 years ago. The last five as a homeschooler. Well, my wife is the homeschooling one, but you get the point. The last 5 years. But you have seen what has happened and what is happening for some. It has been shocking to a lot of folks. But for myself, and I'm no Nostradamus, but for myself, I had seen the beginnings of this socialist, racist, communist push back around 2015. You see, I worked in a public school in the inner city. Never had a problem with the kids as a whole. Obviously, there were going to be some isolated situations, just knuckleheads and stuff like that. Um, some kids are just disillusioned. One threatened to, you know, rob me in front of my children. One was going to attack my family. By the way, none of these things came to fruition. Never thought they would. Wasn't concerned about it. But as a whole, working in the inner city, I had never had an issue. But it started to happen around that time frame because Trump, and I'm not saying I'm voting for Trump or voted for Trump or anything like that. I'm not saying how wonderful Trump is or anything like that. I'm not doing that. That's not why I'm mentioning his name. But suddenly, there was this weird thing being pushed in the school systems and these teacher conference things. This hatred towards Trump, and it was just weird. And just all of a sudden, he's a racist, and I'm like, where did this even come from? And the kids were being taught these things about the advantages of white people. I'm like, what in tarnation is going on? And then suddenly, I'm a bad guy. I mean, I was a bad guy anyways. I ran an in-school suspension department, but but I was, even with that, I was an enemy. But it was okay. It was not a big deal. But then there was just this weird, different vibe that the schools were pushing, teachers were pushing on the student. It's just very, very bizarre. But I began to see among the teachers more talk about social justice, anti white, and anti Jew. Yes, I did say that, anti Jew. I had heard that too from the teachers, from both black and white staff members. Outside of actually two Hispanic teachers, I found no bias on the Hispanic staff members. Not sure why that was, not sure why it is, but that was interesting. It's not quite often as you would have thought it would be. But teachers would talk negatively about the students during PD days. The same students that they're pushing the social justice with, and this anti-white crowd, this all these go on. The list goes on. It was sad. But then they would talk negatively about these students during the PD days, which, if you don't know what PD days are, they're called professional development days. Hate had begun to take over the schools. It had slowly been getting there since the 1900s. I'll even say begin 1800 or 1880 something. I say something. I think 1886 there was a case. The Roman Catholic Church brought a case against Edgarton's school system to take out the Bibles out of the school system. I know a lot of people go, no, it was the atheists in the 60s. No, it started with the Roman Catholic Church. I believe I've already done a study on that and put it out there. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I did. But what was I saying? Development days. I was talking about development days. But the agendas had taken over. History class, all the stuff. And God, like I said, had since been removed by the Roman Catholic Church, starting with the Roman Catholic Church, and then finally the atheists are the ones that edited it. A little weird, isn't it? People are like, that doesn't sound right. I implore you to do the research. Try going to the state colleges or universities today that we may, I don't know, consider teaching the students to obey God, who created all that we know and see. Yeah, there's a fat chance of that happening. I use the word fat. Please don't get offended. It's more like teaching how to hate God and obey your own selfish desires. That's the world we live in. Obeying your own selfish desires. So instead of understanding who they are and what their purpose is, their being, their self-worth with God, they choose without God. Their spirituality, their religion changes, much like today's gender nonsense. Instead of being gender fluid, they're religious or religion fluid. They can never make sense. They wander. Not wonder. They wonder sometimes too, but they wander, lost, looking for anything except for the one who can save them. The funny thing is, and I don't know if it's really that funny, but the funny thing is, which is a great statement, is that the same institutions that mock God and Christianity were once pro-God and pro-Christianity. I guess times have changed. Now don't start thinking, good thing we have Christian colleges. Give me a break. Those Christian colleges or universities have gone far, far from following the Bible and following Jesus. They're now following books about the Bible and following men. Not the men of the Bible. Not the men of the Bible at all. We live in a religious world. As strange as that may sound, with everything you see and hear today on TV, internet, radio, podcasts like this, and other places, we really are. But not as one would think, though. It's not the way one would think. All the religious people, when you talk about Pharisees and the scribes and the sages and the Sadducees, the Sanhedrin, the Sanhedrin sect, going all the way back. But religiously, people are different now. They believe in their own types of religion and creating religions. Religions off of religions. Around 80% of the world considers themselves part of a religious group. Think about that. 80% of the world seems to consider themselves a part of a religious group. And yet we have so much hate, pain, murder, destruction in this world. Oh, it's been written. The Bible tells us it's going to happen. You have 5 majors. What do I mean by 5 majors? Not the major leagues of baseball. You have 5 majors. But when you calculate the offshoots of all these different branches, with every different sect, all these denominations, denomination off a denomination off a denomination, all the daughters of the whore, It is said you may reach around 4,000. 4,000 denominations and offshoots and sects and different things. Sects, by the way, not S-E-X, S-E-C-T-S. That's confusing and chaotic. And who is not the author of confusion? What does it say in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, 33? For God is not the author of confusion, but Satan is. Most of which can't figure out, and what do I mean by most of which? Most of which of these people follow these religions, all these different sects. They worship or they change throughout religious regimes. There is no longer as whole, or as a whole, the view that man is corrupt, lost, unable to help himself, and could face eternal damnation. Today, that true view has faded. Today, because it's a beautiful world we live in, other than the beautiful day I've had today, sun was out today, grass is green, trees are beautiful. Today, the majority of so-called churches have turned to this new age philosophy of positive thinking, making positive things happen, relying on self. And if you are a true Bible believing Christian, you know that's false. And that's anti scripture. Romans chapter 7, verse 18. For I know that in me, that is, in my flesh, dwelleth no good thing. Romans 7:24. O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from the body of this death? In Isaiah, we are all as an unclean thing, and all our righteousness are as filthy rags. So focused today, and by the way, this does not contain itself to people who go to church buildings. This pertains to the non-church going, professing Christians as well. In a world of prisoners who are victims of bad neighborhoods, bad parents, bad schools, no one seems to be guilty of sin. They're all a victim of somebody else, not their own decisions. Goodness forbid that people be held accountable for their actions. A good lawyer, a good psychologist, even a good priest can convince you that it's everyone else's fault. But the Bible teaches differently. The world teaches that today, with the right doctor, the proper approach, the right prescription, the right therapy, examining self, maybe they can help them temporarily. But that's not a long-term solution to self. God is. When one realizes in their flesh they are sinful, corrupt, and they need only one. What we thought of as democracy, freedom, because the only freedom I need and you should need is the one that God gives us. How do I know this? Because of the education you learn from the Bible. Learn about Babylon. In truth, I get to avoid all the Babylons that exist today by the Word of God. So when we look at all these things going on today, and again, I have to say, if you are a born again Christian, you are saved. People say, aren't you worried? I am not. I fear for those who have not given their lives to the Lord. I fear for the ones who have not called out. And I fear that there'll be less as time goes on today. But we are at, and I think I've used this term before, we are at the supper time of the last day. So folks need to wise up and be prepared for what is coming. It is around the corner. And get on this train, because this train is going to pass you by, and you're going to be laying on the wayside of the railroad tracks begging and pleading anyone to help you, and nobody will, because they're too busy worrying about themselves. They're worried about themselves. They're going to help themselves. There will no longer be a democracy. That's a joke and a farce. It's gone. Education? What education? It's all indoctrination. That's what's going to happen in the future. And the modern Babylons of the today, remember there's that one Babylon, although you could say there were other ones in the past, but there will be multiple ones, and then there will be one again, and it will be run again by the Roman Empire, which has always been the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Empire had never died. The Roman Empire is the reason why you have this false democracy, false education, and all of these Babylons are springing around the world. So I implore you, while there is a little light left in the last days, please call out to him. Please call out. Please give your life to the Lord. We're almost there. And if you want to write to the program, send a hate mail or anything like that, or love mail. I always say hate mail. A long time ago, I'm going a little off. I used to wish people would hate me. And people were like, why would you want somebody to hate you? Because I always felt like if people were mad at you and angry at you, then you did something right. You got to people. You were kicking them somewhere, not that place. But you were making a point, you were ruffling feathers, and I have no problem with ruffling feathers. And people say, you just do it on purpose to rile people up. Maybe I do sometimes. But mainly, we need to. We need to ruffle feathers. Like I said before, if you want to write to this program, you can write to Englewood, Tennessee. I'm going to try to leave it in the thing. Englewood, which is Englewood, Tennessee. P.O. Box 465. The area code or the zip code is 37329. Again, that's Englewood, Tennessee. Zip code 37329. P.O. Box 465. And thank you for listening. I do appreciate it. God bless and good night.